I'm VOA Senate correspondent Michael Bowman. I'm speaking with the chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, Republican Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee. In broad terms, the committee provides oversight of America's outreach to the world, including, I should mention, U.S. international broadcasting. Senator Corker was first elected in 2006. He has also been a successful entrepreneur, a businessman, and the mayor of Chattanooga. Did I get all that right?
I think so. Thank you.
Senator Corker, you and I have spoken in the halls of Congress for years. It's an honor to welcome you to the Voice of America.
Good to be with you. Thank you. I've enjoyed touring the facility and seeing all the outstanding work that you and your colleagues are doing here. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator, a Syrian peace initiative is in its infancy in Geneva. Can you envision a diplomatic, negotiated outcome in which the killing stops and America's stated goal, the departure of President Assad, is achieved?
Very difficult at this point. I think the opposition that we communicated some with last week has been put in a very awkward place. The humanitarian things that they had asked for have not occurred. Not even the release of women and children that were born from rape have been released from the prisons that Assad is overseeing. So, I think it's starting off in a place that is going to make it very difficult to lead to that kind of place. I certainly support diplomatic talks, as I think everyone would, but the elements at present do not feel like they're in their proper place. And what's been happening, as you know, is the facts on the ground have been changing. You have Russia that has intervened, and certainly the Assad regime, because of their support and Iranian support, have been making gains, and so pushing back against the Syrians. And as you change the facts on the ground in the way that they've been changed, it makes it very difficult to get to a place that looks satisfactory at present.
Do you envision President Assad ever leaving voluntarily?
At present, again, as he sees that he's making gains, and as none of the things that the UN Security Council resolution stated have occurred. In other words, he's taken none of those steps. He hasn't quit barrel bombing his own citizens. He hasn't dealt with the humanitarian piece. He isn't dealing with this very low-level request. You would think that could easily be met. He's, the facts on the ground are moving in his direction, so it seems to me that he's not yet, the context is not there yet for him to do that.
Now, your committee last week approved sanctions, tougher sanctions targeting North Korea's nuclear program, and in particular entities that help Pyongyang supply and finance its military complex. Would it be fair to assume that some of those entities might be Chinese, and could some complications arise from that?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that some of those entities are Chinese. We've been talking with our ambassador to the UN and the administration relative to efforts that they are trying to make through, the UN Security Council to get China to join in. I know that those have progressed from the beginning in a very slow way. China's responded in not a satisfactory way, as I understand it. And so, yes, Congress is moving on. It's my sense that the UN Security Council discussions are they're not going to make the progress that we would all like. And so, yes, some of those entities will be Chinese entities. And, it's a shame. The country that could really push back against what North Korea is doing is China. As you know, they're always focused on stability and don't want to rock the boat. But I think these sanctions may change that and hopefully cause them to respond in a different way.
For the United States, North Korea is a problem on the other side of the world's biggest ocean. But for its neighbors, North Korea is right on their doorstep.
That's right.
As you pondered sanctions, was there consideration of the law of unintended consequences? This is not a regime that is commonly described as particularly stable or rational.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm very familiar with the fact that we have 28,500 troops right there. I visited there recently. I'm very aware that Seoul is within artillery range of what the North Koreans have. I'm very familiar with the fact that China again wishes beyond for anything the greatest wish for China is stability, but I would actually say that what you've got is the unintended consequences of doing nothing. And you know, the international community has been very engaged in Iran, which is much further behind than North Korea is with their nuclear development. And yet over three administrations here, three failures, abject failure relative to North Korea. So I think what you see is people understanding that continuing as we are is not going to take us to a good place. They continue to do the ballistic missile testing. They continue to work on those elements that will put them in a place to be able to deliver a nuclear warhead. And the fact is that, as you mentioned, they are, yes, very unstable and therefore bound possibly to make some irrational decisions down the road. So it's either do some things now to change that trajectory, or likely end up with someone who's is very unstable, who can dominate with that instability, more so the region, and therefore create instability with our neighbors. So I think it's the right thing to do. Yes, we always worry about the unintended consequences. Maybe this will rattle China to a degree to want to take some steps in a more forward manner.
You mentioned Iran, and you've been highly critical of the international nuclear accord with Iran. Now that it's in place, for better or worse, do you want it to succeed? And are there things a Republican Congress can do to help it succeed?
Obviously, I didn't like the agreement because of the immediate leverage shift that has just taken place, where Iran now has access to a lot of resources it didn't before. And the fact that I felt like it continued the research and development towards a goal that they have, which is, I think, to be on the verge of having a nuclear weapon. So I didn't support it, but of course I want it to be successful. I mean, I want good things for our country. I want good things for the region. And yes, I want it to be successful. And I think where we can add strength, and you say Republican Congress, I would say in a bipartisan manner, because it's felt there are concerns on both sides of the aisle, is to do everything we can to hold Iran's feet to the fire. Since the agreement was agreed to, they violated UN Security Council resolutions relative, again, to ballistic missile testing. And yet, as you can see, there's been no pushback at all, which is really disappointing at the UN Security Council. I think what you've seen, Michael, is you see how the coalition is going to be going forward. It's not going to push back. I mean, there's too many economic interests that exist from Europe. Russia's interested in selling weapons, China's interested in oil, and so you're not going to see a collective pushback appropriately done so at the UN Security Council. So I think what you're going to see on a bipartisan basis here is, knowing that that likely is not going to occur, is us really trying to define what a violation of the agreement is and then pushing back when it occurs. But yes, I do want it to be successful, and I think, again, sending the signal to Iran that violations matter is the only way it can be successful.
So when President Obama says absolute strict enforcement and snapback of sanctions as needed, you're not buying that?
Well, just again, look at what has just occurred. Have you seen our partners in any way push back against the ballistic missile tests, which were strictly in violation of a UN Security Council resolution? No, they're not going to do it. It is not going to happen unless it's grotesque. And so, what you're going to see, it's like boiling an egg. They're going to take, very gradual steps over time. And I think that the U.S. Congress, in a bipartisan way, has to stand firm to keep that from happening.
Now, a number of Senate Republicans say that the deal should be ripped up the moment a new president enters the White House next year. And in fact, a number of your colleagues hope to be that president. Given that America's closest allies helped negotiate the nuclear accord, as a practical matter, can the United States snap its fingers and just walk away?
Yeah. So, I have been disappointed with our allies, and I've expressed that directly. Because, again, I think that so many economic interests were driving the decision. In other words, it wasn't and most things are not in a vacuum, okay? But there were other things that were occurring that drove people to really, stretch, to me, beyond where we should have stretched to get this agreement done. At the same time, a new president coming in, I think would most wisely look at the situation as it exists at the time, look at violations that may or may not be taking place, and decide where to go from there. I think, obviously in a primary like this, everyone wants to sound the toughest, but I think that any president coming in is really going to want to assess the situation as they come in and figure out what is the best way to keep Iran from getting a nuclear weapon.
There is an expectation that seems to be set up with the electorate that if there is a Republican president, that the deal will in fact end. You seem to be saying that it's more complicated than that.
I think that you've had some of the candidates, I think, say that they're going to assess things as they sit. But look, when people are running in primaries like this, sometimes they use rhetoric to show their resolve. And by the way, someone coming in who may sit and assess the situation and try to figure out the best way to go forward may have even more resolve in some cases, because you want to calculate in a manner to try to keep your allies with you. One of the things that made the sanctions, and this is why I was so disappointed that we agreed to a deal that shifted the leverage as this one did, one of the things that made it work was the fact we had an international coalition. As a matter of fact, I passed an amendment in one of the committees that focused on making sure that the sanctions that were put in place were international. So again, I think what a new president is going to want to do is to, through the force of the presidency, which, let's face it, the United States is the greatest power on earth, we still have the ability to convene and lead, is to look at where the agreement is at the time and to try to move our partners along with us, so that if we feel that what we have done is something that's going to lead to a nuclear weapon, and personally I think it does as it sits, then try to shift that direction. And probably the best way to do it is not just to come in and rip it, but to assess and move ahead based on where we are at the time.
Islamic State has had some battlefield setbacks, but seems to be spreading its tentacles from Libya to Afghanistan. You've described U.S. efforts as a day late and a dollar short. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I was just in Qatar, where the aerial operations are being coordinated, and by the way, was most impressed with our leadership there on the ground. After that, I was in Afghanistan, where the Islamic State has established a foothold. And while I was there, believe it or not, our military could take actions against Al-Qaeda, but we could not take actions against the Islamic State. It's ridiculous. And it was a caveat, if you will, in our mechanisms. Fortunately, Ash Carter has reversed that, and now our military on the ground can take actions against ISIS or Daesh. I don't think we ought to, and none of us should compliment them by calling them ISIS or ISIL, but we should call them Daesh. But yes, we have been late, and I don't think there's anybody that would disagree with that. There are a lot of things that led to them being where they are, and we could go back throughout history and lay those out. And certainly, the vacuum that was left in 2011 in Iraq was one of those. I would say our actions that we didn't take in 2013, when we were on the precipice of taking actions against Assad, was a big setback, and again left a vacuum there. But look, it's my hope. I just had a conversation with Secretary Kerry Saturday. It's my hope that the United States, seeing that the actions we're taking is really more right now just containing them, at least in the Syria and Iraq region, and yet, as you mentioned, spreading to Afghanistan, to Libya, to other places, are going to cause us to step up our operations.
Okay, and very quickly, the final question, might I ask. The U.S. Treasury has designated Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, as corrupt. I wanted to ask you for your thoughts on that. Is this a designation that's overdue?
You know what's interesting, I was at another meeting on Saturday, and what's fascinating is that the Russian people are beginning to see, I think this may be the first time in modern times that the Russian people are beginning to realize that they have a leader that has amassed tremendous personal wealth. And I think that is going to create some additional instability in Russia. How a person who was a former KGB person can come into government and amass the wealth that he has, have these lavish weddings for all to see, for his children. I think that I think, again, it's going to be something that as more and more Russians understand that while he's been in office, he's amassed what I understand to be billions of dollars of personal wealth. You cannot do that through just normal government operations. It has to be done through corruption. And I think over time it's going to be destabilizing for his regime as people find out more and more about it.
Senator Bob Corker, Chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.